Germany, March 1945. Cold bit into my face, sharp as ground glass. Snow mixed with the smoke of burned-out trucks, twisting through the valley like ghosts searching for a way out. I lay prone on a frozen ridge above Kleinfeld, my cheek pressed against the rifle stock, the breath from my mask frosting the eyepiece. Below, a German convoy crept along the road, troop carriers, a command truck, and one tanker sloshing with fuel. We had no radio. No artillery. No support. Just the low growl of engines and the brittle click of ice beneath their treads. Through the scope, the tanker filled my sight, a perfect target. One sh*T, and the whole column would ignite. But the scope wasn't regulation. It wasn't even military issue. I'd built it myself, from an old telescope and the lens of a German camera scavenged from a wreck. It broke every rule in the Army's book. If it failed, we'd die here. If it worked, no one would ever know. As I drew in a slow breath and let my finger settle on the trigger, I caught my reflection faintly in the glass, a frostbitten man staring through something he wasn't supposed to make. And I thought, how did I end up here? A watchmaker's son, aiming through a homemade scope at a war that no longer obeyed its own rules? Winter was breaking at last. The frost that had silenced Bavaria for months was loosening its grip. The 84th Infantry Regiment, what was left of it, moved south through slush and thawing mud. Snow still clung to the boots, to the rifles, to the minds of men who had forgotten what warmth felt like. Officially, the front was advancing. In truth, we were limping. Engines coughed. Radios died. Maps bled in the wet. Every mile cost something, fuel, food, or another man. The doctrine we lived under was printed, laminated, and sacred: do not alter, issued we *P***NS. Do not modify optics. Do not take initiative without command confirmation. The manual said the system would provide. The system, in turn, was thousands of miles away, dry, warm, and late. Up front, everything broke faster than orders could arrive. Our scopes fogged solid the moment they touched the air. The factory grease froze in the turrets, and the range dials cracked if you tried to force them. Batteries for field radios died within hours. Command's voice turned to static, and sometimes even static felt like company. They told us war was a matter of discipline. But in the field, discipline became a matter of improvisation. I'd learned that somewhere between Antwerp and Cologne, the day our company ran out of rangefinders and the captain said, "Wait for replacements." We waited 4 days. By the 5th, half our unit was gone. The Army ran on paperwork, we ran on logic. Men rewired radios with fence wire, melted snow to cool barrels, patched uniforms with parachute silk. Some got reprimanded for it later. Some didn't live long enough for reprimands. I remember a morning near Aachen when a sergeant's carbine jammed so hard he smashed it against a wall until the stock split. He was court-martialed for damaging government property. 2 days later, that same sergeant saved a squad using a German MP-40 he'd scavenged. No one mentioned the hearing again. By March 45, rules were suggestions, written in ink that froze, smeared, and ran. Orders traveled by truck, survival traveled by instinct. We all had our quiet rebellions. Mine was glass and brass, a piece of telescopic truth I wasn't supposed to touch. When our standard issue M73B1 scopes began failing, Command sent a memo: do not attempt field modifications. Await inspection. Inspection never came. So I worked at night. By lantern light, in a farmhouse with a hole in the roof, I stripped my rifle bare and laid its parts out on a wool blanket. I turned a German Zeiss camera lens in my hands, polished the glass with a torn page of stars and stripes, and wondered if anyone back home still believed we were following instructions. The Army trusted its supply chain. But war trusted the man who could make things work when nothing else did. We fought in silence most days, cut off, invisible. The front was no longer a line, it was a fog. Somewhere behind it, officers signed forms and updated maps. Somewhere inside it, men like me adjusted screws with numb fingers, trying to make sense of machinery that wasn't designed for this kind of cold. By then, I understood something simple and terrible. Regulations exist to keep men alive in theory. Improvisation exists to keep them alive in practice. That's how it started, not as defiance, but as maintenance. A cracked lens here. A stripped thread there. Until one night, necessity became invention, and invention became disobedience. They called it the final phase of the war. For us, it was just another winter that refused to end. Before the war, I repaired watches in Clarkson, Ohio, a quiet town that smelled of machine oil and winter wheat. My shop sat between a barber and a hardware store. Every morning, I'd lift the blinds, wind the regulator clock, and listen to the world tick into motion. My hands were steady then. Not brave, not SK*led, just steady. I could hear balance wheels the way others heard music. Each timepiece had its voice, some sharp and impatient, others calm as sleep. When the mainspring caught or a gear slipped a tooth, I'd know before I saw it. My father used to call that a gift. I called it attention. He ran a small machine shop down by the rail yard. Old engines, tractor pistons, bicycle chains, anything that turned or whirred, he could fix. He was a man of few words, but I remember one sentence clearer than any. If a part doesn't fit, make it fit. Steel doesn't care what the book says. That became law in our house. Not defiance, not rebellion, just faith in reason over ritual. On Sundays, when the church bells rang, he'd be in the shed, machining replacement gears for a harvester. I'd sit beside him, sorting screws by thread size. He never told me what to do, only asked, "Does it run truer now?" That question stayed with me long after he was gone. By 1940, he was buried in a small plot behind St. Mary's. I kept his lathe and his habit of fixing things no one else bothered to touch. I thought that would be my life, gears, springs, the quiet rhythm of repair. Then came 1941. The news crackled through the shop radio, Pearl Harbor. Ships burning in a harbor I couldn't picture, men dying in a place I couldn't pronounce. By dusk, the post office was already handing out enlistment forms. I filled one out that night. Not because of anger or patriotism. I joined because it felt mechanical, a process that needed completing. The army didn't need watchmakers. It needed infantry. They gave me a rifle instead of a wrench. The *P***N felt wrong in my hands, heavy, imprecise. I asked the armorer if I could tune the trigger pull. He laughed. "You're not here to tinker, soldier. You're here to shoot." But I still carried a small toolkit in my pack, screwdrivers, oil, and a loop. I used them on sights, compasses, even on jammed *P***Ns from other platoons. When radios failed, I was the one digging through their guts, finding cracked solder joints. Some officers called it initiative. Others called it interference. I called it survival. War stripped everything down to function. A rifle fired, or it didn't. A man breathed, or he didn't. I understood that language better than the one of speeches and orders. In England, before crossing into France, I spent evenings alone by the hangar lights, taking apart an old telescope a British sapper had traded me for cigarettes. He said it was broken. I said nothing ever really is. That telescope became my first experiment in defiance. I replaced its cracked lens with the glass from a damaged Leica camera. The curvature wasn't perfect, but it magnified cleaner than regulation scopes. I wasn't thinking of the battlefield yet. I was thinking of precision. Of how the world, even at its ugliest, still followed rules of optics and refraction. By the time I landed in Normandy, I'd already learned to stop asking permission. Commanders rotated, orders changed, but machinery obeyed physics, not hierarchy. Every soldier carried something from home. For some it was a photograph. For others, a letter. I carried my father's small brass caliper, the edges worn smooth from years of use. I kept it in the breast pocket of my field jacket, next to the ration chocolate. It wasn't sentiment. It was alignment, a way to measure the world when everything else came apart. That's who I was before the ridge at Kleinfeld, a man who believed that if a mechanism failed, it wasn't disobedience to fix it. It was duty. I never thought that logic would one day put me on my belly in the snow, staring through a scope I had no right to build, deciding between a rule and a road full of Germans. It began with glass, always the glass. Army-issued scopes looked precise in photographs, neat as diagrams in the manuals. But in the field they were nothing but fog catchers. The metal shrank in the cold, the seals failed, and the lenses clouded with every exhale. The crosshairs might as well have been drawn in steam. The first time mine froze, we were northeast of Liège, dug into a gully half full of meltwater and fear. Orders were to hold position and await recon. It was mid-February, the air so thin and cold that rifles cracked if you handled them wrong. I wiped the scope again and again, uselessly. The officer behind me said, "Don't touch the optics, Dawson. They're calibrated. Wait for replacement." I looked at the horizon, nothing visible but snow and smoke, and said nothing. That night, during shelling, the lens split clean across. A spiderweb of fracture lines turned every reflection into chaos. When the bombardment ended, our section commander wrote it up for resupply. Then he ordered us to wait. We waited 3 days. By the 4th, another unit moved up, young, nervous, under-equipped. One of them asked if I'd seen any movement beyond the ridge. I told him I couldn't see anything through fogged glass. He said quietly, "Then I guess we'll die politely." That night, I decided to stop being polite. In the ruins of a farmhouse, I found a broken telescope, cracked lengthwise but still holding its objective lens. A German piece, stamped Zeiss Jena, left behind by someone with better orders. Beside it lay the mangled remains of a 35mm camera. I pocketed both, along with a roll of copper wire and 2 brass rings from a shattered chandelier. Under a torn blanket, by candlelight, I worked. I melted wax from a ration candle to seal the joints, used a knife edge to score new grooves for the adjustment ring, and aligned the lenses with a compass needle and string. The magnification wasn't uniform, but the clarity was frightening. The others laughed when they saw it. "What are you building, Ray? A telescope to watch the war end?" "Something like that," I said. The next morning, the fog lifted just enough to reveal movement at 600 yards, a German mortar team setting up by a hedgerow. The officer squinted through his frozen scope and saw nothing. I aimed through mine. They looked like ghosts in blue light, clear as glass figurines. The first sh*T took the spotter. The second split the base plate of the mortar. The third scattered the rest into the trees. The officer stood behind me, stunned. "How the hell did you even see them?" I lowered the rifle. I fixed the scope. He frowned. "You weren't authorized to modify equipment." I wasn't authorized to miss, either. He wrote a report that night, full of careful language, unorthodox field adjustment, effective but non-standard. Awaiting command review. Nothing came of it. No reprimand, no praise. Just silence, the kind that fills a file cabinet somewhere far from the front. After that, I began collecting glass like other men collected rations. Every village had shards, binoculars, lenses, camera filters. I'd trade cigarettes for them, polish them with wool, test curvature by moonlight. The jokes never stopped. Dawson's optics shop, they called me. But when the real snipers couldn't hit through frozen fog, they borrowed my contraptions. And when one of them made a clean sh*T through 200 meters of mist, he handed my lens back and said, "You ever think of selling these after the war?" I didn't answer. By then, I'd already learned something the manuals refused to admit: a we*P*N was only as loyal as the man willing to understand it. The Army issued us perfection on paper, clean lines, theoretical range tables, diagrams of certainty. But on the front, perfection cracked like ice. And those of us who survived learned to fill the cracks with whatever we could find: wire, wax, instinct. That night, I cleaned the lens again and held it up to the candle. The glass caught the flame and split it into 2 points, one bright, one dim. I thought of my father's words: "If a part doesn't fit, make it fit." That was the first time I broke a rule. And the first time I realized it might save us all. Fog came down like unspooled wool that morning, thick, soundless, erasing the edges of things until trucks became shapes and men became breaths. The thaw had turned the roads to black syrup. Our boots sank, our thoughts did too. Before dawn a runner reached us with a single order: observe only. Do not engage. A fuel convoy is expected along the Kleinfeld road. Report, hold, await artillery. He handed me a slip with grid numbers already smeared by wet gloves, then vanished back into the vapor. We set in on the ridge. I checked the rifle, cycled the bolt, warmed the trigger with my palm. The scope's waxed seams held, no fog inside the tube. I turned the elevation drum until its improvised attents kissed the mark for 500 yards. The wire crosshairs, twisted from salvaged field telephone line, floated steady in the glass. Then the radio died. Not all at once, but in a stutter, a cough of static, a syllable, a breath, and silence. I wrapped the case with a knuckle, reseated the handset, resealed the battery cap with a strip of tape. Nothing. The operator shook his head and mouthed dead. So we waited without a voice to tell us yes or no. The fog thinned and thickened, opened like a curtain, closed like a fist. When it lifted, I saw the road. I saw them. First a scout car nosing the bend, canvas slick with meltwater. Then a command truck, antennas bent like reeds. Behind it the convoy, 2 Opel Flatties stacked with crates, a pair of half-tracks, and in the middle the thing that mattered, a tanker with black paint and frost-silvered seams, swaying on tires that sank to the rims. I could smell it though the wind was wrong, the sour, metallic breath of fuel. They were heading south, not toward us, but toward the corridor behind us where our armor licked its wounds and our kitchens kept the fires alive. If that tanker crossed the line, the enemy would have a day more of movement, a night more of engines. Their tanks would wake. Ours would meet them empty. Orders said watch. Logic said stop the heart and the arms would fail. The scope made the tanker look close enough to touch. I could read the chalked letters on the rear baffle, the stenciled capacity, the crust of road salt at a weld I didn't trust. My breath drifted across the eyepiece, a pale cloud that tried to claim the glass, the wax ring held it back. I tested the wind with a pinch of ash from last night's stove, then with snow shaken off my glove. It drifted left to right, slow, patient. I dialed 2 clicks to compensate. The rifle settled into my shoulder as if it belonged there, would aching with the same cold as bone. Hold, someone whispered behind me, though there was no longer a chain to hold us. Habit had a voice even when command did not. I tracked the tanker's cab as it climbed the shallow grade toward the spur road. The driver leaned forward, knuckles white on the wheel. A second man rode the step, boots braced, rifle across his chest. The convoy bunched to keep contact in the fog. If I hit the tanker, the rest would pile into heat and panic. If I missed, the ridge would light up with return fire, and this hill would become our grave. I thought of the rule. I thought of the runner's breathless order. I thought of the kitchens, of the wounded laid out on stretchers along a barn wall 2 valleys back, of engines that had to move by midnight or never. The crosshair steadied on the seam I'd chosen, not center mass, but just ahead of the rear axle where the baffle met the skin. Thin metal. High chance of rupture. Flame would do the rest. Ray, the operator said softly. A question without words, are you going to break it? I let the breath out. The valley rang with nothing. The fog opened its hand. There was no permission left to ask. Only the target, the wind, the weight of a rule that had kept us alive until it didn't. I took up the slack on the trigger until metal spoke through my glove. Then I made the smallest decision a man can make, the one that changes everything. I eased the safety off as if the motion could be kept secret from the world. My fingers were steady, not because my hands weren't shaking, but because I had trained them to make a decision without the luxury of trembling. Frost had numbed the joints, the cold made every movement an argument with the metal. I set the rifle into the crook of my shoulder until the stock felt like an extension of bone. The scope, my assemblage of Zeiss glass, camera elements, and wire, framed the tanker in a thin black reticle. It was a pirated geometry, an unauthorized promise. I checked the wind again. I'd learned to read it like a man reads a ledger, ashes from the cook stove, a ribbon of steam from a distant boiler, the way a flag hung limp against its staff. Today the drafts pushed the smoke left to right at a steady 2 clicks. I compensated, 2 small turns on the elevation drum, the detents I'd filed into place singing softly under my thumb. The crosshair sat where metal met seam, the weak point where a struck baffle would spray fuel and ignite. Aim for structure, let combustion complete the law of war. Silence pressed around me. It wasn't the absence of sound but the density of it, men breathing, a truck idling, the registers in my chest counting down. I thought of rules, the paper orders that forbade alteration of gear, the briefing that told us not to give away our position, the doctrine that insisted the chain of command would always be more reliable than a man with a pair of pliers. Those rules had a weight to them historically, like medals in a drawer. Here and now their weight only stuck in memory. What mattered was the calculus of fuel, distance, and time. I exhaled slow and even, letting the breath fog the eyepiece for a ghost of a second before the waxed seal reclaimed the glass. My cheek felt the cold wood, my cheekbone stung. I thought of Clarkson, my father's lathe humming beneath a lamp, the smell of oil and brass and the steady, stupid hope that if you fixed something it would stay fixed. He'd have hated that I was about to break a rule. He would have understood why. There was a calculus to disobedience, a geometry and a margin of error. I had practiced the arc of the sh*t in my head, bullet velocity, muzzle rise, the compound effect of temperature on powder burn, the odd drag of melted snow on the barrel. I'd drilled it with blank cartridges and bitter patience until the motion of loading and cocking had the rhythm of a prayer. Now those rituals served a small, terrible purpose. My finger found the trigger. Not a snap, a deliberate easing. The world contracted to the seam in the tanker, to the fine line between metal and fate. I nudged, and the rifle answered with a dry, true report that tore through the valley. For a fraction of time that stretched like taffy, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat and the clean line of sky over Kleinfeld. Then the world ruptured. The round struck where I'd meant it, the seam gave, the skin parted, and a black spray hissed into the air. For an instant nothing else happened, the spray hung like an ugly promise. Then the tanker took the breath of fire. A bloom of orange unrolled across the metal like mercury catching light. The blast was not cinematic, it was a physical law, vapor met flame, rapid oxidation, a noise like geology rearranging itself. The first vehicle lit, then the second. The convoy screamed alive in flame and smoke. Shockwave hit my face, snow and grit and a pressure that folded me into the dirt. I tasted copper and the faint, syrupy tang of burned fuel. The ridge filled with light and heat that contradicted the cold that had ruled it a heartbeat before. Men shouted, and fire answered, a truck's axle sheared and sent a cascade of splinters into the road. For a few impossible seconds, time stacked, the tactical map in my head redrew itself in flames, and the calculus that had guided me proved tragically simple. My scope survived, its seals holding like a lie told well. The lenses had cried salt for a moment and then cleared. The crosshairs floated steady over a horizon I no longer recognized. There was no triumphant cheer. The operator beside me made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. We were alive. The valley was not. I lay there feeling the rules rearrange in my mouth. We had disobeyed the doctrine and won a reprieve. That was the paradox the army would not easily admit. Sometimes saving men required breaking the very script written to save them. My hands smelled of G*N oil and candle wax. I thought of paper orders warming in some office far behind us. I thought of my father's lathe and of making a part fit because nothing else would. When the captain finally crawled up the ridge an hour later, he did not look at the smoldering wreckage the way a general would, he looked past it, to the men who crawled back down into the line, and then at me. His face held a ledger of judgment and a quieter accounting of relief. He said nothing about doctrine. He said, "Keep your head down." That was all. I had broken the rules, and for a moment the rules were irrelevant. The valley of Kleinfeld answered in fire, and the math I trusted more than memos had kept us breathing. The blast did not sound like a single explosion, it sounded like metal learning a new language. A low detonation first, then a hard, climbing roar as vapor turned to flame and flame found something larger to love. Heat punched the ridge. The tanker's skin lifted and peeled back, a petal of incandescent steel. The pressure wave flattened the roadside brush and slapped snow off the furs like dust from a rug. For a heartbeat the convoy hesitated, a nervous blink in machinery, then chaos asserted rank. The command truck braked into the fireball and vanished inside it, canvas roof inhaled by pressure, then expelled as burning flags. I saw a brief flash of map paper, rectangles fluttering upward, curling black in the updraft. They burned like moths, 1 second gridlines, the next ash. An Opel swerved into the ditch, front axle snapping at the kingpin. A half-track tried to claw past on the shoulder and slewed sideways, track thrown, rear idlers screaming. Ammunition crates in the bed cooked off, not a grand fireworks show, but ugly little hammer blows that stitched sparks along the road. Someone yelled orders in a voice too high for command. It broke into coughing and disappeared behind the fuel's black column. I stayed on the glass. The scope held. No fog, no fracture, no wandering zero. The wax I'd rubbed along the joint beaded, then ran, then hardened again, but the seal did not fail. The crosshair hung in the heat tremor like a wire over water. I picked the second sh*T, the command truck's rear differential, and put it there. The axle locked. The chassis dropped. That wreck became a gate across the road, and every vehicle behind it met that gate in smoke, panic, and the arithmetic of momentum. The air changed tastes, cordite's metallic sweetness, rubber's bitter breath, the diesel's animal reek. The fire built its own weather. It drew wind from every field and fed itself until it stood higher than the poplars, a trembling column the color of verdicts. My cheek burned on the stock, my left hand felt the fore-end warming into the glove. I worked the bolt as if I were still in the shop, smooth, patient, refusing to rush. 2 Germans ran clear of the inferno, then stopped as if surprised by daylight. One reached for a map case slung tight across his chest, the instinct of rank, another grabbed his arm and dragged him the wrong way. I led them a finger width and pressed. They folded into the ditch. The case tumbled and burst, pages lofting, then vanishing in hot drafts. Sector overlays, resupply routes, unit markers, all the careful ink of a collapsible army went up like winter breath meeting a stove door. Behind me, the operator laughed once, a dry bark he swallowed, ashamed of it, then coughed himself quiet. Someone to my left said, "Holy God," and then remembered where we were and shut his mouth. The ridge had rules of its own: talk small, look long, shoot true. I checked wind again by instinct, though the fire made its own corrections. Heat shimmer dragged the reticle left. I clicked back half a mark, compensated for mirage and the slow set of my barrel. We were far past doctrine now, into craft. The 4th sh*T found the nearest half-track's radiator. Steam rose like a surrender flag. The crew bailed into orange light and didn't get far. It was not heroism to keep shooting. It was maintenance, the prevention of movement. Every enemy vehicle that lived another minute was a minute our wounded didn't have, a mile our kitchens would lose, a gallon their armor could burn finding us again. So I kept the cadence: see, decide, place, break, breathe. Somewhere below, an ammunition trailer took fire. The report cracked in increments, sharp and regular, like a metronome teaching fear. Shrapnel hissed into the tree-line around us. Chips of bark ticked against my helmet. I lowered the profile of the rifle, kissed earth, raised again, found the command truck's roof, buckled, glowing, bleeding rivets, and sh*T it once more out of habit, as if nailing down a lid. The scope never blinked. It had no right to perform at all, let alone this well. Factory rules said it shouldn't exist, field physics said it fit. The homemade crosshair, 2 strands of telephone wire soldered to a brass ring, stayed tight, no drift with recoil, no twist with temperature. The focus ring, rethreaded on a kitchen knife and polished with toothpaste, turned with a clean, oiled hush. I had built a thing the manual did not recognize, and here it was, recognizing the war. In the end, the convoy stopped resembling vehicles. It became shapes: a bent frame here, a scorched drum there, a set of tires fused into a single black oval. The road itself sagged where the tanker's burning belly had licked the macadam soft. Flames guttered, found fresh fuel in the ditches, guttered again. Smoke pushed low under the ridge and rolled over us with a warm animal tongue. Silence arrived like an officer, late, rigid, necessary. The last rounds cooked off. The last men who could run had done so into the woods, leaving rifles leaning in doorways without doors. I lifted my head from the stock and felt the cold find my face again, as if the valley had forgiven me. We sent 2 down to check the wreckage once the heat fell back from unbearable to merely punishing. They came up carrying nothing but a dented water can and the idea of a story they would not tell. One said there were maps burned into the road, ghosts of grids fused to tar. I cleaned the lens on the corner of my sleeve and looked once more through the scope that should not have been. The glass was clear as a winter star. The wire was true. It had worked. Not pretty, not approved, but better. The fire burned most of the afternoon, then sulked in the ditches, a low animal chewing tires and wire until the fuel remembered it was mortal. We stayed on the ridge until the heat stopped trying to climb the hill. When the smoke thinned enough to see roofs again, someone tapped my boot and said the captain wanted me. He was in a copse of alder below the crest, helmet off, steam lifting from his hair. He didn't waste time. "That was your sh*T?" he asked, as if he were reading a serial number off a crate. I said, "No, sir. Must have been artillery. Like the report will say." He looked at me the way men look at a bridge they're about to cross even though one board is missing. "Artillery," he repeated, then nodded once as if he'd learned a new word. That's what I thought. He didn't offer praise or threat. He only said, "Get your men hot food. Keep your head down." Then he put his helmet on, became a rank again, and walked into the smoke as if entering a file. Silence did the rest. There was no reprimand, no congratulation, only the bureaucratic hush that keeps the machine from stalling when it tastes its own gears. Later, a clerk came by to ask if we'd seen anything of intelligence value. We handed him a tin of warped map clips and a water can punched through by shrapnel. He wrote it down like scripture. By dusk the story had already split into versions. The official line, "Battery fire intercepted enemy convoy," moved rearward with the chow vans. The unofficial version traveled faster, one man at a time. Dawson lit a tanker with a rifle and a sin. When it reached the aid station, I heard it had been 2 tankers and a mine. By the time it reached regimental HQ, it was back to artillery. The truth stayed where it always lives in war, at ground level, with cold fingers and a dirty *P***N. Within a week I began to notice binoculars lashed to rifles with bootlaces, opera glasses clamped in pipe brackets, camera lenses taped over standard tubes. No one asked me for measurements. They looked, they guessed, they copied wrong and right in equal amounts. It didn't matter. They were building belief. One corporal from E Company came by at night with a pair of field glasses and a question he didn't want to say out loud. I showed him the wax seal, the wire crosshair soldered to a brass ring from a chandelier, the way I'd cut shallow detents into the elevation drum so frozen fingers could count. He listened, then handed me a photograph of his wife as payment, realized what it was, took it back, and left a tin of coffee instead. The quartermaster stopped speaking to me altogether. Regulations require an enemy, and I fit better than most. When he couldn't avoid it, he spoke to my sergeant. "If the men alter optics," he said, "they assume liability." We were long past liability, we were counting sunrises. At night I cleaned the scope by lantern, the glass clear as pond ice, the wire crosshair thin as a hair pulled from a comb. It had survived its trial by heat and shrapnel. It owed me nothing, and yet it kept faith. I wrote down the lens spacing in my notebook in case the next shell found me before the next man found an idea. Days later the captain sent again. Same copse of alder, same steam from the hair. He stood with a folded paper. "Division wants clarity on the artillery." He glanced at me. "You have any?" "None, sir," I said. "We were under cover." He folded the paper back into itself, like a secret returning to ground. "Good," he said. "Carry on." Carry on meant, we will not try to fit this into the doctrine while the doctrine is busy fitting itself into the war. It meant, don't make me choose between your results and my orders. It meant, keep doing what you did and never admit you did it. In the evenings, when the thaw turned trenches into seams of black water, I thought about that. The army loved stories with salutes attached, this story needed a closed mouth. The men who lived because of the blast did not ask for a citation. They asked for more heat tabs, for dry socks, for a way home. I slept badly. In dreams the tanker did not explode, it kept rolling, black and patient, and my trigger broke under my finger like chalk. I'd wake with the taste of raw fuel in my throat and hold the rifle until the metal decided to cool. Officially, nothing had happened. Unofficially, men looked longer through glass that wasn't regulation, and sometimes the night moved an inch farther back. That was enough. If there was a lesson, it wasn't heroism. It was geometry. A rule is a straight line laid across unknown terrain, a life is the curve that refuses to match it. Out there, with frost in the seams and smoke in the lungs, the only law that held was the old one I learned in my father's shop, if the part does not fit the need, you change the part, or you change the need. I chose. The valley did the arithmetic. And the book, wisely, stayed shut. After the war, I came back to Clarkson the same way I had left it, by train, carrying more metal than luggage. The station looked smaller, the clocks louder. I unlocked my shop with a key that still fit, though the door had warped from years of disuse. Inside, everything smelled of dust and machine oil gone sour. The workbench waited like a patient left on the table too long. I rebuilt it piece by piece. Hung the old regulator clock on the wall again. The first time it ticked, I nearly flinched. The sound of measured time had become foreign. War trains men to live in seconds, not minutes. I found my father's caliper where I'd left it, in a drawer lined with newspaper from 1938. Its brass had darkened. The hinge squeaked like a memory. Customers returned slowly. Farmers with broken alarm clocks, miners with pocket watches that had survived years underground. They came not because they remembered me, but because time still needed tending. I fixed what I could, sometimes for money, sometimes for food, often for the silence that followed work well done. I thought of it as penance, the making of small things right after years of breaking large ones. For a long while, the war felt like rumor. Then, one spring morning in 1965, an envelope arrived with the return address of the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum, Aberdeen, Maryland. Inside was a letter typed on yellow paper and a photograph. The photo showed a rifle, rusted but recognizable. Mounted on it was a scope with an improvised brass collar and waxed seams. The caption read, "Experimental Sniper Scope, 1945. Anonymous Design, 84th Infantry." Below, the curator's letter, "If this belonged to you, we would like to record its origin." It outperformed all standard issue models tested in field conditions. Please advise. I sat with that letter for an hour before answering. I told them it was not mine, it had been a collective accident of necessity. I signed it with no rank, just a name. A month later they sent another note saying the display would remain anonymous by request, though a small plaque had been added. It read, "Homemade Sniper Scope, 1945. Worked better than the Army's best." I did not visit. But I imagined the glass case, the dull light, the tag wired to the trigger guard, schoolchildren pressing their faces against the pane, reading a story stripped down to a sentence. They would see invention, they would not see frostbite or silence or the way the lens had smelled faintly of wax and smoke. That was fine. Every artifact edits its maker. Years passed. The Army, ever efficient at forgetting, reinvented the same lesson. In 1971, an acquaintance from Aberdeen sent me a manual titled Field Adaptation and Improvised Optics. The first chapter described the principle of functional modification under combat constraint. The diagrams looked familiar, cross-sections of a rifle scope, magnification tables corrected for field variables, a schematic nearly identical to mine, though they had tidied the lines. There was even a footnote, design inspired by undocumented field solutions, Western Front, 1945. That was the Army's way of saying thank you without admitting it had been wrong. I kept the manual on my shelf between a book of horology and my father's trade almanac. Sometimes, when the shop was empty, I'd open all three and notice how similar they were, measurements, tolerances, the discipline of precision. Whether it was a balance wheel or a rifle sight, the law was the same: alignment saves lives, misalignment ends them. I never spoke about the ridge, or the tanker, or the smell of burnt maps. I married late, fixed clocks, and learned to sleep through silence again. People called me patient. They mistook patience for restraint. What I carried wasn't virtue, it was recoil. Once, a boy from the high school brought in a broken camera and asked if I could fix its lens. He watched while I worked, curious. When I reassembled the focus ring, he asked, "How do you know where the pieces go?" I told him, "They tell you, if you listen long enough." He smiled, thanked me, and left. Later that evening I realized he had paid with exact change, coins dated 1945. I took it as coincidence, or perhaps as punctuation. The war had taken many things, but it had returned one truth intact: rules keep the order, mistakes keep the future. The Army could file my name away, polish the legend, teach the method to a new generation, but somewhere in those clean diagrams lived a ghost with frostbitten hands and a rifle that shouldn't have existed. I like to think he's still there, invisible behind the glass, watching through his own creation, measuring the light, waiting for the next man who understands that sometimes the smallest disobedience is the only act of precision left. They laughed when I built it. A telescope cannibalized into a rifle sight, madness, they said. They stopped laughing when the valley of Kleinfeld went up in fire. When one sh*T silenced engines, maps, and orders alike. Rules are written by survivors. I have seen how easily ink burns. In the manuals, they'll call it adaptation. In truth, it was disobedience measured to the millimeter. I was never given a medal, never asked to speak. The army prefers victories without fingerprints. But sometimes, late in the shop, when the clocks hum together, I hear that same rhythm, the breath before the sh*T. A man aims, not at glory, but at logic. A rule bends, and 100 men live. That is the only citation I ever needed. A ridge of snow, a rifle of my own making. And silence that still listens for the next war to forget its rules.